They said it would be worth it. They said Britain would be better off, freer, richer, and more powerful after Brexit. But more than 4 years after leaving the EU, the data paints a very different picture. Not just for Britain, but for my home country, Germany, too. And the real question is this: who got hit harder by Brexit? And spoiler alert, it's not even close. But let's look at the numbers. And let's talk about how the dream of sovereignty translated into the reality of economic shrinkage, trade disruption, and lost jobs. When the UK left the EU on January 31st in 2020 and fully exited the single market and customs union a year later, it did so with great ceremony and even greater uncertainty. For months, British politicians claimed that Germany would suffer most because German car makers, because trade imbalances, because the EU needed the UK more than the UK needed the EU. Except that didn't happen. At least not according to every reputable study published since. According to the Office for Budget Responsibility, the UK's long-term productivity has been cut by 4% due to Brexit. Not 1, not 2, but 4 full percentage points. Cambridge Econometrics estimated that by 2023 the UK economy was almost £140 billion smaller than it would have been had Brexit not happened. And that's not just a theoretical loss. It means less investment, less income, fewer jobs, and less tax revenue. Earlier studies put the cost of the Brexit referendum alone at around 2.5% of GDP. And the Bank of England projected continuous GDP shrinkage from mid-2020 to mid-2024. And that's not a dip, that's a trend. Yeah, a downward one. But what about trade? The UK's trade with the EU has dropped sharply. Between 21 and 23, British exports to the EU fell by 27%, imports from the EU dropped by 32%. Think about that. That's nearly a third of EU imports gone. And all those promises of new trade deals making up the gaps? Well, they didn't. Because the new deals Britain signed largely replicated what it already had through the EU. Just in most cases a bit less than they had. No extra access, no big wins, just added paperwork, added bureaucracy, added cost. And British businesses reported longer delays, higher border checks, and more complex procedures just to sell the same goods to the same customers. And now consider jobs. By 2023, Britain had roughly 2 million fewer jobs than it would have had without Brexit. The construction sector and financial services were hit particularly hard. One report suggested that by 2035, as many as 3 million jobs could disappear. And let's not forget the ripple effects. Supply chain problems, labor shortages, especially in transport and logistics, and reduced access to skilled workers due to new immigration rules. It's been a perfect storm of self-inflicted damage. And now let's talk about Germany. Yes, Germany was also affected by Brexit, but the scale is entirely different. The Bertelsmann Foundation estimated that Germany loses up to 10 billion euros per year due to Brexit. Yeah, that's a lot, but in context, it's manageable. With a softer Brexit, that number dropped to around 5 billion euros. That's still painful, but compared to the UK's losses, it's a paper cut. On a per capita basis, Germany's losses amount to about 115 euros per person per year. The average Briton, by contrast, was estimated to be £2,000 poorer by 2023. And that's a difference of scale, a difference of pain, a difference of political consequence. Germany did see regional impacts. Places like Düsseldorf, Cologne, and Upper Bavaria saw Brexit-related losses of 520 to 650 million euros a year. But none of these regions came close to the overall contraction seen in the UK economy. And Germany did not lose access to the single market. It didn't lose access to the customs union. It didn't have to rewrite its trade rules or renegotiate hundreds of treaties. Instead, it kept its place at the EU table and kept the benefits that came with it. So why the difference? Why was Brexit so much more painful for the UK than for the export country Germany? And the answer lies in 3 words: the level of integration. Before Brexit, the UK was deeply embedded in the EU's internal structures. It wasn't just about free trade, it was about regulatory alignment, it was about frictionless borders, it was about mutual recognition, shared standards, and of course common legal frameworks. Leaving meant unpicking all of that, and no trade deal could recreate what was lost. The UK's sovereignty now comes with border checks and customs forms. It comes with visas and tariffs. It comes with lower GDP and weaker productivity. And it comes with rules of origin. And Germany, meanwhile, stayed inside the system. It remains part of the Eurozone. It doesn't face currency fluctuation risk in its trade with the EU. And despite initial fears, German exporters have adapted. They still trade with the UK, just under more complex rules. But their main market, the EU, is intact. Britain, on the other hand, turned its back on its biggest and closest trading partner. And the results, well, they have been clear. When comparing the two countries, the UK saw a 4% drop in productivity. Germany did not. The UK lost £140 billion in potential economic output. Germany lost €10 billion per year. And the UK saw a collapse in trade volumes. Germany saw trade become more expensive, but not collapse. And the UK saw job losses in the millions. Germany didn't. The UK faces a permanent structural reduction in economic capacity. Germany doesn't. Some hurt came from our former government. But yes, Brexit hurt both, but one walked away from the table while the other stayed in the room, and the consequences are exactly what economists predicted, and they've landed where the Leave campaign said they wouldn't. The EU did not crumble. Germany didn't beg for a trade deal. Britain didn't soar. Instead, it sank. And it's also worth remembering that Germany's diversified economy, the robust manufacturing base, and deep EU integration helped cushion the blow of Brexit. The sectors most impacted in Germany, automotive, chemical, and financial services, had already started diversifying their trade rules well before the formal withdrawal of the UK. German firms invested in EU-based supply chains to minimize the Brexit shock. And meanwhile, the UK saw thousands of small businesses stop exporting altogether, citing unsustainable costs and customs delays. German universities retained access to EU research funding, while British institutions saw reduced participation in Horizon Europe. Getting better now, but you know what I mean. And Germany maintained Erasmus Plus, while the UK pulled out and created a new scheme with significantly fewer participants. By the way, my old grammar school is now an Erasmus Plus school. Looking forward to see how that's working. And this isn't just about economics, it's about lost opportunity and lost influence. And while Germany continues shaping EU policies, Britain's voice is now absent from every negotiation table it once dominated. From environmental standards to digital regulation, the UK has gone from rule maker to rule taker. And when the rules affect British exports, there is no British representative left to shape them. Germany's economy continues to benefit from collective EU bargaining power. The UK now negotiates trade deals on its own, and despite the rhetoric, those deals have not compensated for the loss of frictionless access to a market of over 400 million people. And while UK inflation spiked in part due to labor shortages and supply disruptions, Germany's inflation followed more global patterns buffered by EU-wide mechanisms. There is a reason Brexit is no longer the rallying cry it once was. Even among its champions, few boast about it anymore. They still exist, but they are getting fewer. The public mood has shifted, and so has the business sentiment, so has the data. Germany absorbed a hit, but Britain's economy absorbed a transformation, a smaller economy, a more isolated position, and a reduced global influence. This is not just a British problem, it's a case study of how political decisions have consequences, of how a referendum reshaped a continent's economic map, and of how two countries, one inside, one outside, experience the same shock in two very different ways. So next time someone asks you who got hit harder by Brexit, Germany or Britain, you know what to say. You know the numbers, you know the jobs, you know the facts. And if Brexit was supposed to be the start of a new golden age, then where are the spoils? Because from here, it looks a lot more like a self-inflicted recession than a revolution.